Welcome to Mentoring in Real Life, where we talk about what it takes to find and be a great mentor. I'm Angela, and together with my co-host Bill, we know the power of mentoring and what it can do in your life on both sides of the table. If you're interested in learning tips, tricks, and hearing stories about mentoring, you're in the right place. Come join us. Hey Bill, how you doing today?
Angela, I've never been quite this happy.
I'm a little under the weather myself, so you might be doing more talking today than normal, but hey, that's probably better for the audience anyway.
I'm not sure about that. We'll see.
So today we wanted to address a topic for mentoring that might seem obvious to some, but we think it deserves some real thought about what it means to be a part of a team and how everyone should approach that, and specifically how to be someone that everyone wants to work with.
Yeah, so one relatively straightforward piece of advice that we would give as mentors is to make sure that you are somebody that everybody wants on the team. So whether you're trying to get hired or you're trying to get onto another project or you're looking to get moved to a position of more responsibility, it just makes sense that you want the people who are involved in that decision making to know that you're somebody they want around in that position, that you're going to be a great teammate. And I would tell you that personal experience shows this is important whether you're the brand new employee, you're a mid-level manager, or even a senior executive. Because as it turns out, senior executives, obviously they're a member of the team that they're leading, but they are often and probably always members of broader teams outside their own organization. And so being a good teammate in all of those inter-organizational relationships is extremely valued, even as a very senior person. So I want to make sure nobody's confused that this just applies to people on small teams. This is a very broad discussion. And so whether you're the newest person or you're the senior leader, like being a CEO, you need to be thinking about this. And so, in prepping for this discussion, we were trying to think about, so what makes a great team? Well, serendipitously, Sunday night, 60 Minutes ran a short video in the what they call the last minute of 60 Minutes with Coach Mike Krzyzewski, who, for those of you who don't know, and by the way, he's referred to as Coach K by the rest of the world because his Polish name is a little bit hard to pronounce sometimes. They asked him for a 60-second game plan for the United States for the next 250 years. And so before we get into that, so what makes him so special that 60 Minutes would come to him? Well, he coached the Duke men's basketball team from 1980 to 2022, as well as coaching 3 gold medal teams at the Olympics. And while he was at Duke, his teams were in the Final Four 13 times. They won the NCAA championships 5 of those times. All this to say, Coach K knows something about building good teams. In fact, it's so good of a clip, we included in the show notes so you can go see his 1-minute summary of values for a great team. And so his game plan for the country talks about having a championship culture and acknowledge that the best teams have the best values. So if today's podcast is about how to be someone that everybody wants on their team, then we should talk about what the values of a great team look like and what it means to live those values.
Yeah. Coach K's list that he talks about in the clip, he has 7 items, and we're going to get into each one of those 7 items. But the first one, Bill, is doing the right thing. First, you got to come out as a teammate wanting to do the right thing. And this sounds relatively straightforward, and for the most part it is. But that said, there are always legitimate considerations that might be outside of your direct control. So things like customer desires or political influences. We're talking about office and business politics. We're not talking about getting into a discussion about national politics, or what your boss directs as opposed to what you think should be done, what your team thinks is right versus what you think is right, and so forth. So doing the right thing is often its own reward when you look at the mirror at the end of the day.
Yeah, so there's no question. And that sort of translates to doing the right thing even when nobody is watching. There's some debate about who might have said that quote, but it's unimportant who said it first. it's really important to think about this for how you behave in your day-to-day activities. And so it's some simple questions about doing the right thing. Is it legal and ethical? Okay, well, that seems pretty obvious. Is it aligned with the values of the team and the mission of the organization? What are sort of the unintended consequences of doing whatever you think you're about to do? Who's going to gain and lose, and how severe would the harms be if you follow through with that thought? And then as you're going through this and you're trying to prep up for what the right stuff to do is, have you talked to the right people? Could you explain that decision easily? Are there safer or better alternatives you should be considering? And if it's necessary and you think you're out on a limb somewhere, have you escalated that conversation up the chain to make sure that you're on the right path?
When you were just talking, Bill, I think it's important to foot stomp the idea of what are those gains and losses and how severe to the team, and just talk about that a little bit more, because doing the right thing includes that. It includes thinking about what are the unintended consequences that might happen as a result of making that decision. And if you don't have those answers, that's where you consult the relevant people to make sure that you're thinking about all the different aspects that you might not have thought about before. You document the decision and explain why you made that decision, and make sure that that's included in part of your team's collaborative notes, so that it's not lost in the future about why you guys made the decision that you made in the path forward. And then if there are safer alternatives, think of those and maybe take action on those, right?
Yeah, sometimes doing the right thing includes like listening to people with other ideas. It's not just I'm going to do the right thing. I already know what the right thing is. I'm not listening to anybody's suggestions anymore. Okay, maybe you're not quite doing the right thing. You may want to rethink that a little bit. And certainly, as a member of a team, since this is all about being a good teammate, there's lots of other people on the team. Maybe they have some good ideas too. And so doing the right thing means being inclusive of those as well.
Being inclusive of other people's ideas goes into the second main bullet that Coach K talks about, which is respect, and knowing that everyone on the team is important, and to treat everyone with dignity and respect. And this is non-negotiable, right?
I'm totally on that page. In fact, in our previous organization, being inclusive and making sure that everybody is treated with dignity and respect was a conversation we had. And so when you're putting forth these values and as a member of the team, you're demonstrating that. I went hard over when I was going through the value development at that organization and said, I know we want to be positive, and the positive version of this is we treat everybody with dignity and respect. The other side of that sentence is, and if you can't operate that way, you can't work here. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's you're making it clear with your teammates. For me, this was always an easy way to gain respect, that you treat people that way and you don't tolerate people who treat people poorly. Mm-hmm. And so I think that's, as a member of a team, again, making sure that you're somebody that people want around, you treat people the right way and you call people out and don't tolerate people who are not doing that. So I think that's an important sort of let's set the ground rules early kind of conversation that's going to demonstrate that people can trust you as to be a good teammate and to treat them well.
Absolutely. And the first thing to do is be approachable, be friendly. How many times did I walk down hallways, and we had a joke in our organization because we had so many engineers in our organization that you could...
Wait. Are you talking bad about engineers now?
You could tell the outgoing engineer because it was the person that was looking at your shoes instead of their own shoes. Have you ever heard that joke?
I have heard that.
Which isn't true. I mean, we had plenty of people that were amazing coworkers. Obviously, we were part of that organization for decades for a reason. And so the idea is first being approachable and friendly. Smile at your coworkers, greet your coworkers, show interest in their lives and their work. And that actually, people want to work with people who care about them, right?
Of course. Be curious, not judgmental, if we're going to quote Ted Lasso here for a little bit. But it's It's being curious about your coworkers and actually caring about what's going on in their lives, and making sure that they know that you're on their team, and so you're open to collaborate, you're open to their ideas, and so sort of building on that. Not only you're open to their ideas, you're happy to share credit for what's going on and give them credit for whatever they've come up with. And so as you're inviting inputs and you're incorporating all that feedback, it's important to acknowledge everybody who has contributed to those decisions. And so you're not only respecting their opinions, but you're letting them know that you respect the opinions.
Yeah. And we know that all conversations aren't going to be happy all the time, right? There's going to be some conflict, and conflict, as we have, talked about with our own teams, is actually good. We actually want conflict. The key is how you approach it. And so being respectful and being somebody that people want to work with means that you're actually positive and composed, even when faced with pressure or when something is happening that you didn't expect. You're adapting. You can adapt to new priorities and demonstrate flexibility. When you can keep your tone calm and focus on solutions and avoid public venting about something that's happening, that really demonstrates somebody that other people want to work with.
You bet. And certainly, because occasionally I get passionate in what I'm talking about, this is something that I got to work on a lot through my career in the workforce, is to make sure, even if I have strong feelings, keeping the tone calm serves a much more important purpose, and that is that it doesn't shut other people up. It doesn't put people off. They're still willing to engage. So we shouldn't pass over that one too quickly.
Actually, I have a story about this. First of all, I used to, when I would mentor other people, talk about it like being a duck on a pond, right? So a duck on a pond, the pond surface is very smooth as the duck is gliding by, but the legs underneath are working hard. And so when you're a leader that's calm and composed, then you're like a duck on the pond, where things are moving in that brain, things are moving inside your head and your heart, but you're showing composure, right?
I mean, I'm not supposed to say everything that comes to my mind.
Well, you might have been on one side of it and I might have been on another side of it, because I was told that I was like a robot because I didn't show enough emotion, especially when faced with adversity. So there's probably some goodness in both of those.
Yeah, I don't think I ever got that comment. Come on, Bill, you never let us know what's on your mind. So, but keeping some calm in that conversation, certainly that's going to make people want you around as a teammate, because they know they're talking to you. You're not going to fly off the handle, but you're still listening. And so when we talk about listening, we're listening empathetically would come to mind. It's important to recognize your colleagues have different perspectives. They have different constraints going on in their mind. And so making sure that you're asking questions and trying to understand what their priorities are, before you start proposing changes. Those are really good sets of behaviors that will serve you well when you're trying to work with other folks. You don't know what's going on in their lives. You don't know what's going on in their experience of the past. And so when you're having those conversations, trying to empathize with wherever they might be coming from is going to be incredibly valuable for the communication you want to have with your teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. When we're talking about respect too, we also cannot leave this topic without talking about being respectful of people's time. And so it is so important because people have stuff to do. They have jobs to do. And it's so important to be as efficient as you can when you're in meetings and in communication with folks, to respect their time. And you do things like use agendas, start and end those meetings on time, or keep your messages concise, right? That's all in service of and respect for another person's time. And one of my favorite teams, and I know you and I both, having been in uniform, you knew that if you're on time, you're late, right? So if the meeting starts at 10 o'clock and you walk in the room at 10 o'clock, you're late. So 5 minutes early is on time, or at least a few minutes early is on time, so that you're respectful of everybody else's time in the meeting. And that can start and end on time, right?
I'm with you. I was not always the best example of that. I have to admit, if you have other people scheduling your time, sometimes, so it's worthy of just thinking about it. If you put a bunch of meetings on your calendar and there's no time between them to transit from one meeting to another, you're going to be late a lot. So something to think about when you're trying to be respectful of time. Don't schedule one meeting in this room to go until right on the hour, and expect that you're going to be in a meeting that's in another building the next instant. I know that seems trivial, but these are things that as a good teammate you can be planning around and thinking about how do you want to schedule your day. I was not perfect at that. I did a lot of learning on that, particularly the more senior I got, when a lot more people were scheduling my meetings for me. So I totally am on your team that says you need to be respectful of all those people, because when you're late to the meeting and they're holding it up for you, how much money are you wasting for your organization because everybody's sitting around waiting on somebody?
That's exactly right. And nobody's going to be perfect at every single one of these. It's just becoming more and more aware that this is what is defined as being a good teammate and being somebody that people want to work with. And the third piece of that is really having courage, being able to say or do what needs to be done in the moment. That is absolutely the measure of a good teammate.
Yeah, and this one can be kind of tough sometimes, because it means being very, very accountable for your own work, whether it's going well or it's not going well, and so owning up to that. And when something goes sideways, okay, here's the problem, here's what I think caused it, and here's what I'm recommending as the fix for that sort of thing. And sort of that demonstrated proactivity, the courage to get ahead of it and to lean into it, particularly if you are at some, I was going to say it, if it's your fault. As I've said before on this podcast and many, many times in my professional life, it's all my fault. We know that already. So now we can stop worrying about whose fault it is, and we can just talk about what the solutions are. And so maybe somebody would say that takes courage. I don't actually think that takes much courage. I think that just takes commitment to what it is that you're supposed to be doing. And so it becomes very easy to be courageous in sort of taking responsibility, because you're not worried about the blame part. You're worried about just getting the job done and whatever your loyalty is to that job. So I just think it's really important to do that sort of thing. And when you're doing that, sometimes it's not just about whatever mistakes you've made, but if you think if you've gotten direction that you think is going to take the team or the company or the organization in a bad path, okay, then it takes a little bit of courage to speak truth to power and speak up even when people senior to you are trying to offer a different answer.
That's so true. Part of being courageous too is proposing improvements or flagging risks and giving it suggestions. And those might be small, but they also might be big too, right? So as an example, we've talked on this podcast as well. My whole end of my career, the last 8 years of my career, I was focused on bringing coaching to leaders in our organization, right? That was me proposing something as a solution to leadership development within our organization. And then I had to be prepared to own that solution. So, there's a lot of folks, we call them helium hands, right? Helium hands in a meeting or whatnot, where they're always raising their hand and offering up ideas or suggestions or solutions or whatnot, or they're, maybe volunteering for things as well. But especially when they're raising their hand to give ideas on how to solve something, be prepared to own it and be prepared to be the person that the organization is looking to for solving that problem. And that makes you somebody that people want to work with and that the organization is really happy to have you part of.
Well, I would suggest that they're lucky to have you when you're doing that sort of thing. You're not sitting there watching people go down a bad path and not saying anything, because that at some level is being a little bit disloyal to the organization. But sometimes it's just because you don't have the courage to speak up to somebody who's senior to you, even though you might have the better solution. And so being courageous enough to do those kinds of things respectfully, when you're talking up the chain, obviously it isn't, hey knucklehead, that's a really dumb idea. Delivery counts, as it always does when you're communicating with folks, but standing up and saying, I think there's a better opportunity here or a better solution makes you an incredibly valuable teammate. So I'm on your team here.
Yeah. And this really ties very much into the fourth element that Coach K talked about, which is selfless service. And we know that this is easy for those of our colleagues in uniform or those who are supporting those in uniform to understand what selfless service is all about. But it's actually easy for any industry when you believe in what you're doing. So if you're not just in it for a paycheck, but when you're on a team with people you like, then it's easy to reflect selfless service in your actions. The first thing that you do is be solution focused. So like you talked about earlier where, okay, we know it's my fault. Now that we know it's my fault, let's find the solution. That emphasizes outcomes over blame. When you start blaming others and other teams and other organizations for your own reasons for not being able to move the ball forward, that gets you in a victim mentality where you're not actually taking responsibility. But when you're solution focused, that emphasizes outcome over blaming others.
You bet. And so there's just no value in spending all your time blaming everybody else if you're not moving the ball down the field, if you're not trying to actually find solutions. So, and of course, when you're doing that, you find the solutions, people are contributing, make sure you're showing appreciation for everybody else who is contributing to it, and give credit where credit's due. You certainly want to make sure that you're recognizing all the rest of the contributions to the solution, and you're emphasizing collaborating on the solutions. You're working together with folks to find the solutions to problems, to show them people that you value what they're doing. And again, when we're talking about selfless service, all this stuff is done because this isn't about you. It's not about you being successful. It's about making the team or making the mission successful. And if you're doing that well and you're that teammate that everybody wants around, the rewards will still come to you. I don't think people have to spend a lot of time worrying about that. It's easy to be selfless in the service that you're doing to the organization if people recognize the folks who are contributing, and you're in that for the purpose of making sure that the mission is accomplished. You don't have to worry about whether or not you're getting credit for it. In fact, I would suggest that if you're an organization that never gives acknowledgement to the people who are providing the solutions, you might want to be looking for someplace else to work. Selfless service can be its own reward at some level, but I don't want to be naive about this. Of course, people want to be recognized for what they're doing, but if you're only in it for you, if you're only in it for the paycheck, and you don't give a rat's behind about what happens to the mission or your teammates, you're not going to be the people that everybody wants around.
Yeah. I have a quick derailer on this one, Bill, because there's also this notion that, when you're being interviewed or when you write your resume or whatnot, you put accomplishments that, quite frankly, you didn't do without a team. But often people put it in first person, like I did this, even though
Right.
they couldn't have done that without a team.
Of course.
Right. And so how would you mentor somebody in navigating demonstration of both selflessness as well as, owning that, hey, I did lead the team that did it?
Well, and so you just captured the recommendation that I would give. If you led a team that delivered something, you can say, I led this team that delivered this phenomenal thing, and we worked as a team, and we collaborated with the rest of the organization. We delivered something on time. We did all that stuff, as opposed to I did this, and if it wasn't for me, we never would have been able to get there. Now, you can certainly say, I set the table for how this was going to be delivered, and I made sure that we had a structure that was going to make the team successful. And so you can take credit for the contributions that you made in that conversation, but saying that you did it all by yourself when you know that there was a big team doing it, Most people see right through that kind of stuff.
It's disingenuous.
That's one mild way of putting it, I suppose.
Well, and actually, when you do that, you also are demonstrating that you are a loyal teammate.
Absolutely. You're
And
demonstrating that you're the kind of person people want around on the team.
that's right. And loyalty is Coach K's fifth characteristic of being a good teammate, being somebody that other people want to work with. And really, you do that by demonstrating loyalty to what the team is trying to accomplish, like the mission, and loyalty to your teammates. So we're talking about loyalty in terms of loyalty to the mission as well as loyalty to your teammates. Having your teammates' backs has immediate and enduring benefits. So be the person everybody wants on their team. If you find yourself on a team where you think everyone is a loser or incompetent, you might want to check in the mirror before making any accusations.
Yeah, I have a very clear example in my mind from my Navy days where I was going to be relieving this person. I was their successor for the job on board a ship. And when I went to visit them 6 months beforehand, I just wanted to see what's the lay of the land. And they went through and took 30 minutes to tell me how screwed up everybody around them was. And I mean, their middle managers, all of the employees, all of the workers on board the ship. And, as I walked out, I said, if everyone else around you is screwed up, I think the problem is resident in the mirror. And as it turns out, when I came back, that person had been relieved for cause. It turned out also that when I got to meet that team and I got to work with them, it probably was one of the best teams I have ever worked with in my entire career. They were so dedicated and so competent and so skilled, and all I had to do was let the reins go. So the point is, if you think everybody else is a loser, you better look in the mirror first.
Yeah. So 2 ways to show loyalty to your team. First of all, when your team has activities, team building exercises, social events, that kind of thing, participate, engage in them, and get to know your teammate. Get to know the people that are on your team so that they want to work with you, right? Engage in discussions and contribute to the team's goals. Secondly, stand up for your team. When you are in discussions and there's ideas that your team has come up with, defend those ideas, defend those contributions, advocate for your team's proposals in meetings, and foster a safe environment where people do feel safe and comfortable sharing their thoughts and ideas.
Absolutely. If we're talking about being loyal, it's not just loyal in the meetings, it's loyal even when you're not in the meetings. If people are talking bad about your teammates and you know that they don't deserve that, standing up for them and making sure that that safe environment continues even when you're not sitting with all your teammates. They will know that you have their back even when they're not in the room, which is a really, really strong piece of the loyalty.
So the sixth component that Coach K brings up is duty. So be aligned with the team's mission and goals. Believe in it. If you're delivering a product or service you don't believe in, that will come through in your interactions with your teammates and likely in your own performance. It's difficult to be consistently enthusiastic about your job if you don't believe in what you're doing.
Yeah, there's no question. That stuff becomes very, very obvious very quickly if you're not in on the mission and recognizing the duties that you have. And so when you're talking about that with your teammates, when you're communicating that, you want to be very clear and timely in what you're doing, and obviously delivering that with a respectful communication. So as you're moving forward with the team, figure out what the team's going to do, summarize the decisions, put the next steps in writing, so that you're tracking everything you can to make sure that you are remaining completely aligned with the duties that you have as a member of that team.
Absolutely. And the final one that we can't ignore is trust. Be somebody that people trust. And the way you demonstrate being a trustworthy person is being reliable. People trust that you're going to deliver, that you say what you're going to do, and then you do what you said you were going to do. Meet deadlines, and if delays happen, give early updates and a clear plan on how you're going to meet those deadlines.
Yeah, so that's, I'm sure, when you start talking about trust, that's the first thing that comes to mind is that the people around you can trust you to deliver stuff, but it goes beyond that. If you're going to be a good teammate, then you have to be trustworthy of your teammates. They need to believe that, they can talk to you and that you're going to respect the confidentiality of any sensitive information they're sharing. And so as you are that great teammate, there'll be sensitive things that they share. Some of it will be work related. Some might be family related. Hey, there's a lot going on in my family, and that's why I'm sort of struggling through stuff right now. Okay, so be that trustworthy teammate who says, yeah, you can share stuff with me. I won't share it inappropriately. And so that's that kind of trust. First off, it takes a long time to build that kind of trust. It takes only a couple seconds to lose it. So demonstrating and living the value of trust now and always with your teammates is going to pay huge dividends and make it much easier for people to say, yep, you're the person I want on the team.
That's right. So recapping the 7 areas that Coach K brought up. The first one is do the right thing. Number 2 was respect and make sure everyone is important. Number 3 was courage. Have courage to say or do what needs to be done in that moment. 4 was selfless service. Demonstrate that. Number 5 was demonstrate loyalty to the team and what it is trying to accomplish. Number 6 was duty and dignity of the work and being aligned with the team's mission and goals. And 7 and final is trust. Be a person that people will trust, that you're going to do what you said you were going to do, and that you are going to hold their own sensitive and confidentiality in the utmost respect.
So, anything else that we missed there, Angela?
I don't think so. How about you, Bill?
I think we did. I think we did Coach K fairly well. Maybe not as well as Coach K, but that's why I'm not coaching at Duke. So, in any case, we want to thank everybody for listening to this episode of Mentoring in Real Life. If you have thoughts or questions, feel free to leave us a comment or send us an email, which we've included in the show notes. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate the podcast, and share it with a friend. Until next time, help others climb.